When my father collapsed during my brother's wedding rehearsal dinner, I thought the worst thing I'd face was watching monitors in an ICU waiting room. I was wrong. The night I sent the family thread, "Dad's in emergency surgery. Please get here." My sister-in-law sent back a photo of her new kitchen renovation. Granite countertops, a copper farmhouse sink. Nobody came. Not my uncle, not my cousins, not the people who had just 2 days earlier clinked glasses and called us family. 3 weeks later, I sat in a hospital cafeteria eating vending machine crackers when my phone lit up with 47 missed calls and one text from my brother that made my hands shake. "Don't go anywhere. Something's wrong. Pick up." I did, and then I'll tell you everything. My name is Callum Dries, and this story still costs me something to speak out loud. But I've carried it long enough alone. Before I tell you everything, drop a hi in the comments or let me know where you're watching from. Knowing you're here matters more than you'd think. And if this story stays with you, please subscribe, not just for me, but for every person who sat in a hospital hallway wondering why their phone stayed silent. Now let me start at the beginning. My father, Gerald, was not a man who asked for help. He was the kind of man who shoveled his neighbor's driveway before his own, who showed up to your moving day with a truck and sandwiches, who quietly slipped money under the plates of struggling relatives at Thanksgiving. He had been doing it his whole life, giving without keeping score, which was part of why nobody expected the chest pains he had been quietly logging in the margins of his crossword books for 6 months. He didn't tell anyone until his cardiologist told him he had no choice. I found out on a Tuesday in March. Dad called me from the parking lot of his doctor's office in Columbus, his voice carefully casual, the way it always got when he was trying not to scare me. "The doctor says I've got some blockages. They want to do a procedure." He said procedure, the way someone says procedure when they mean something bigger. I drove the 2 hours from Cincinnati that same night, and by the time I got to his house in Guyana, he had already minimized it into a short paragraph: triple bypass, scheduled for the Friday of my brother's wedding rehearsal weekend, because that was the first available slot, and Dad said he wasn't going to be the reason the wedding got moved. My brother Theo was getting married in 6 weeks. The rehearsal dinner was Thursday, the surgery was Friday morning, and Dad had told no one in the extended family because he didn't want, his exact words, "the whole circus descending before I've even done anything wrong yet." I was the only one who knew. I started keeping a notes file on my phone. Surgeon's name, Dr. Ania Patel, St. Anthony Medical Center. Surgery time, 6:15 a.m. Expected duration, 4 to 6 hours. Estimated recovery, 6 to 8 weeks minimum. I wrote down every detail because that was what I did when things felt like they were sliding. I logged them. If I could track it, I could manage it. My girlfriend Bree once told me I was the most organized, panicking person she had ever met. She said it like it was a compliment. I chose to take it that way. The rehearsal dinner was at a steakhouse in Dublin, the kind of place with leather booths and amber lighting and a prix-fixe menu. My future sister-in-law, Renata, had spent 4 months selecting. She had organized everything about this wedding with the precision of someone who treated every family event as a stage set and herself as the director. I had been Theo's best man since he asked me at Christmas, and in the months since, Renata had made it quietly clear that my job was to show up, toast appropriately, and otherwise stay out of her way. At dinner, I sat across from my uncle Dennis and his wife. My cousin Laura was at the far end, on her phone. Renata moves through the room like she was tallying points. She paused at my elbow long enough to say, "Your dad seems tired. Tell him to rest up. We need him for photos tomorrow." She didn't ask why he was tired. She moved on. That night, I drove Dad back to his hotel and sat with him in the lobby while he drank decaf and we pretended everything was routine. He squeezed my shoulder when we said goodnight. "You don't need to come to the hospital," he said. "Theo needs you tomorrow." I told him I would be at both. I was not at both. At 5:50 Friday morning, I slipped out of the hotel and drove to St. Anthony. Dad was already in pre-op, calm in the papery gown, telling jokes to the anesthesiologist. I held his hand until they wheeled him back, and then I sat in the family waiting area with a cup of coffee that went cold and my phone in my lap and the notes file open, as if checking his surgeon's credentials one more time might keep him safe. At 6:48, I opened the family group thread. It included Theo, Renata, Uncle Dennis, my Aunt Carol, cousins Laura and Mitchell, and a handful of others who had been added over the years until the thread had become a broad and shallow thing, like a river spread too wide to be deep. I typed, "Dad is in surgery right now. Triple bypass at St. Didas. Anthony. I'll update as I hear anything. Please keep him in your prayers." The replies came in minutes. Theo sent, "Let me know the second you hear. Love you." Uncle Dennis sent a prayer hands emoji. Carol sent, "Keeping Gerald in our thoughts, honey." And then Renata, 3 minutes after my message, sent a photo. It was her bathroom. She had just had the tile replaced. White subway, herringbone pattern, new chrome fixtures gleaming. The caption said, "Finally done. Worth every penny." No acknowledgement of what I had just posted above it. 6 people reacted to the bathroom photo with hearts and fire emojis before anyone said another word about my father. I put my phone face down on the chair beside me and stared at the doors to the surgical wing until they blurred. The surgery lasted 7 hours. Dr. Bo Patel came out just after 2 in the afternoon, still in her cap, and told me he had done beautifully and that the next 48 hours would tell us the most. I nodded and wrote that down too. Then I sat back in the chair and called Theo. He was already at the wedding venue, 90 minutes away, managing seating charts. He said, "That's great news, man. Really great. Kiss his forehead for me. I'll come as soon as I can get away." He never came that day. I stayed until Dad was settled in the cardiac ICU, then drove back to Columbus for the tail end of the rehearsal dinner setup, changed my shirt in a gas station bathroom, and sat through 3 hours of toasts and laughter and stories about Theo while I refreshed my notes file under the table. At 10 that night, I posted an update in the family thread. "Dad's out of surgery and stable. In cardiac ICU. He's resting. No visitors until at least tomorrow. But he's doing okay." I added the room number and the visiting hours. Theo sent a long voice memo I didn't have the bandwidth to play. Everyone else sent the same vague warmth, "So glad. Give him our love. What wonderful news. Nobody said they were coming. Nobody asked what I needed. What happened next, I only learned gradually. The way you learn something is wrong, not from a single alarm but from a pattern of small silences." 3 days into Dad's ICU stay, I got a text from my cousin Laura. She had seen something Renata posted on Facebook. She sent me a screenshot. Renata had shared a photo, one of the hospital hallway photos I had posted in the family thread, the one showing Dad's door with the little nameplate and the flower arrangement Bree had dropped off, and the caption read, "Been spending time at the hospital supporting Gerald. He's such a fighter. So grateful to be close by for the family right now." It had 84 likes. People were commenting things like, "You are such an angel. Theo is so lucky to have you. Give Gerald our love. Tell him we're praying." She had not been to the hospital, not once. Her name was not in the visitor log. I know because I had signed in every single day and I would have seen it. I stared at the screenshot until the edges of my vision went soft. Then I opened my notes file and wrote Renata Facebook post. Date, time, my photo, her caption, visitor log, her name absent. I wrote it down the way I wrote everything down because I already understood, somewhere underneath the exhaustion, that this was not going to resolve itself quietly. The next day I called Uncle Dennis to update him on Dad's progress. He asked how Renata was holding up. I said, slowly, "I'm sorry." He said, "She's been there every day, right? That's a lot to take on." I set the phone on my leg for a moment, breathed, picked it up again. "Dad's only had 2 visitors," I said carefully. "Me and Bree." Uncle Dennis went quiet. He said, "Huh, that's strange. She posted about being there." I said, "I know." And then I said I had to go check on something and hung up before he could hear it in my voice. That night, my brother sent a message just to me, off the main thread. "Hey, is everything okay between you and Renata? She says you haven't been updating her on Dad's condition and she's had to go out of her way to stay informed." I read that sentence 4 times. I had been posting updates in the family thread every single day. Every single day. I told Theo that. He said she says she's not in that thread. She had muted the thread. She had muted it, posted my photos publicly on Facebook as her own, and then told my brother I wasn't keeping her informed. I opened the notes file and kept writing. On day 8, Dad was moved out of cardiac ICU and into a step-down room. It was a good sign. He was cranky about the food and making fun of the daytime TV selection, which meant he was improving. I brought him a crossword book and sat beside him for 2 hours while he worked the Tuesday puzzle, and I pretended to read. He asked once if anyone else had called. I told him Theo had sent a voice memo. He nodded and went back to the crossword. I did not tell him about Renata. That evening, I got a call from Mitchell, my other cousin. He had seen the Facebook posts. He'd also, apparently, seen a second wave. Renata had created a separate group chat I hadn't been included in, something called Gerald's Recovery Circle, where she was posting updates on my father's condition, framed as though she was the primary point of contact. She had shared the room number I posted in the family thread. She had shared his doctor's name. She had shared, word for word, things I had said in my updates, removing the parts that made clear they came from me. Some people in that group believed she had been to the hospital. Some of them had sent her gift cards to cover her gas. Mitchell said, "I think she's running a whole other version of events over there, Cal." His voice was careful, like he was handing me something breakable. "People think she's the one keeping this family together right now." I looked at my notes file. 18 days of entries, every doctor's update, every medication change, every moment I had sat alone in that waiting room eating crackers out of a machine. "Nobody's been keeping this family together," I said. "Nobody's been here." On day 19, I opened my phone to 47 missed calls, all while I had been asleep in the chair in Dad's room, my ringer off because he needed quiet. 29 texts, 11 from Theo, 3 voicemails from Uncle Dennis, and 1 text from Mitchell that simply said, "Don't go anywhere. Something's wrong. Pick up." I stepped into the hallway and called Mitchell back. He spoke fast. There had been an incident at Uncle Dennis's house the night before, a family dinner to discuss Gerald's care plan going forward, which I had not been told about. Renata had presented herself as the family coordinator. She had told everyone that I was, in her words, struggling to cope and that she had been quietly stepping in to make sure Gerald's needs were being met. She had shown them the Facebook posts as evidence of her involvement. She had suggested that going forward, all updates should come through her, to reduce the burden on me. My uncle had agreed. Several cousins had agreed. Theo had sat quietly at the head of the table and not disagreed. I stood in the hallway of the cardiac step-down unit, and I let the silence be whatever it needed to be for a moment. Then I went back to my phone and I called Theo. He picked up on the second ring. I did not say hello. I said, "She's never once been to this hospital. I have been here every day for 19 days. I have a notes file with every update, every doctor's name, every change in his condition. And the hospital has a visitor log. Do you want to tell me what you'd like to do with that information?" Theo was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know, Cal." I said, "I know you didn't. But now you do." He said, "She told me you weren't keeping people updated." I said, "Check the family thread. Every day." Scroll back. Another silence. Then, "I'll call everyone tonight. I think we need to have a conversation together. All of us." I said, "I think so too. And I think Dad should be part of it because it's his recovery people have been claiming credit for." We set it for the following evening. Video call, everyone invited. Theo sent the link. I spent that day at the hospital the same way I had spent every other day. I brought Dad a new crossword book, a better one, the kind with Thursday level difficulty that he liked. I sat with him while he did his breathing exercises and complained about the night nurse being too cheerful. I helped him walk the length of the hallway twice, slow and shuffling, his hand on my elbow. I documented his progress in my notes file the same way I always had. And I did not tell him what was coming, because he was not strong enough yet for that particular truth. That evening, I sat in the family lounge down the hall with my laptop open and my notes file ready, and the hospital's visitor log, which the charge nurse had printed for me without hesitation when I explained the situation, her expression saying more than she probably meant it to, folded in my jacket pocket. I waited for the call to connect. Faces appeared one by one. Uncle Dennis, Aunt Carol, Laura and Mitchell, side by side. 2 other cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, and Theo sitting at his kitchen table with the careful look of a man who has started to understand something he wishes he didn't have to. Renata sat beside him, back straight, hands folded, the practiced composure of someone who had rehearsed this. I let Theo open the call. He thanked everyone for coming. He said there was some confusion about what had been happening during Dad's hospitalization, and he wanted to clear it up. Renata spoke before I could. Her voice was smooth and concerned. She said she understood this was a sensitive time. She said she had only been trying to help carry the weight, that I had seemed so overwhelmed and she hadn't wanted to add to my burden by asking permission for every little thing. She said she had been in regular contact with the family because someone had to be. I said, quietly, I have a visitor log from St. Anthony Medical Center. The only names on it are mine and my girlfriend's. Not once in 19 days has anyone else signed in. The screen went still. I held the log up to the camera, printed on hospital letterhead, dated, stamped. 2 columns. My name, 19 times. Bree's name, 5 times. The rest was blank. I said, I also have my notes file. I've been logging every update since the day Dad went into surgery. Every doctor's report, every medication change, every visiting hour I spent here. The posts in the family thread are timestamped. You can scroll back and see every one. I turned my phone to the camera and slowly scrolled through weeks of entries, the record of every day I had shown up alone. Mitchell said, quietly, so everything she posted on Facebook, Renata, cut in, her voice sharpening for just a moment before she recovered the softness. I shared those updates because I was trying to keep the family informed. Callum wasn't reaching out to everyone individually. Aunt Carol said he posted in the thread, Renata. Every day, I got every message. A pause. I just didn't reply as much as I should have. Her voice broke a little on that last part. Uncle Dennis leaned forward toward his camera. He looked older than he had at the rehearsal dinner. He said, you told me you'd been there every day. He wasn't asking. He was looking at Renata and not looking away. She said, I meant I had been present for the family. Emotionally, supporting Theo through this. Theo said, Renata, just her name. The way you say someone's name when you need them to stop. The silence that followed lasted long enough that someone's kid could be heard somewhere in the background of another call asking for a snack. I said, I'm not doing this to cause more pain, but my father has been lying in a hospital room for 19 days asking if anyone has called. And I've had to answer that question honestly, which is hard, and I don't want to have to keep doing it. I need the people in this family who want to be part of his recovery to show up. Actually show up. Not post. Not coordinate from a distance. Come to the hospital. Sit with him. Read the crossword out loud. That's what he needs. And going forward, any communication about his care will come from me directly, not through a secondary channel, not from someone who hasn't met his night nurse. I looked at Renata when I said the last part. His night nurse's name is Sandra. She's been there since day 4. She knows his crossword pace and she brings him extra apple juice because he asked once and she remembered. I know that because I was there. Laura was crying quietly. Mitchell had his hand over his mouth. Theo said, I'll be there tomorrow morning. First thing. His voice was flat in the way that means something is being decided, not performed. And we're going to talk, Renata. Tonight. She didn't respond. Her face on the screen was very still. Uncle Dennis said, Carol and I will come Saturday. If that's okay with you, Cal? I said it was. I told him Dad would be glad. I told him to bring a harder crossword book if he could find one, because I had already given Dad the Tuesday level and he'd finished it in an afternoon. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet of the family lounge for a while. The monitors down the hall beeped in their steady and different rhythm. I thought about my father shoveling other people's driveways for 30 years and asking nothing in return. And I thought about how the people who love quietly are always the ones most surprised to find they've been alone. The next morning, Theo arrived at 7:15. He had a coffee for me and a crossword book for Dad. A Friday level 1, the thick kind with the black cover. And he stood at the foot of Dad's bed for a long time before he said anything. Dad looked at him for a moment and then looked at me, and I gave him the very small nod that means it's okay. I'll explain later, the kind of language brothers develop when they've been navigating the same parents their whole lives. Dad opened the crossword book. Theo pulled a chair to the bedside. They talked for 3 hours. I stepped out twice to give them room. When I came back the second time, Theo was reading a clue out loud, and Dad was squinting at the ceiling the way he always does when he's working through an answer. I sat across the room and let that be what it was. Renata sent me a message 2 days later. It was long, the kind of message that runs through several phases: explanation, justification, a brief detour into grievance, and then something that resembled an apology without quite landing on one. I read it once. I wrote back 3 sentences. I don't think you did this out of nothing. I think you wanted to matter during something hard and you found a shortcut. But the shortcut cost me, and it cost Dad. I need some time before I can talk to you about the rest of it. Then I put my phone in my pocket and went back to Dad's room. The cousins reached out one at a time over the following week. Laura called and cried for 20 minutes and I let her. Mitchell texted and asked what he could bring when he visited. Aunt Carol arrived on Saturday as promised, with a coffee cake she had made herself and the complete New York Times crossword archive from 2019 printed in a binder, which made my father laugh for the first time since before the surgery. A real laugh, the full chest kind I had not heard in 3 weeks. When Uncle Dennis shook Dad's hand, Dad said, "Took you long enough, Dennis." Uncle Dennis said, "I know, Jer. I know." Neither of them said anything else about it, and I think that was right. Dad was discharged on a Thursday afternoon in late April, 31 days after he had walked into St. Anthony wearing his regular clothes and handing me his watch to hold. Bree drove. I sat in the back with Dad and held his discharge papers and his crossword book and the printout of his new medication schedule. Dad looked out the window at the highway the way he looks at things he has decided to be grateful for. When we got to his house, Theo was there. He had stocked the refrigerator with soft foods and cut the grass and left a note on the kitchen table that said, "Home is ready. So are we." It was Theo's handwriting, but I understood it was meant from both of them. Dad stood in his kitchen doorway for a moment, hand on the frame, breathing the particular air of his own house. Then he said, "Someone make coffee. I'll do the puzzle." That night, after Bree had gone to bed and Dad was asleep in his chair with the crossword half finished in his lap, I sat at his kitchen table and opened my notes file for the last time. 31 entries. Every day counted. I scrolled from the first line, Dr. Bow, Anaya Patel, 6:15 a.m., triple bypass, all the way to the last one, which just said, home. Then I closed the app and set my phone face down on the table and listened to my father breathe in the next room. There will be people who say I should have said something sooner. Maybe they're right. But when you're in a waiting room at 6 in the morning asking a machine for crackers and watching your father's name on a surgery board, you're not thinking about group chats. You're thinking about the sound of his voice and whether you'll hear it the same way again. The family politics happen in the margin of something bigger, and sometimes you don't have the hands to hold both things at once. What I know now is this: presence is not a post. It is not a caption, not a like, not a message, and a thread you've muted so you don't have to see the hard parts. Presence is Sandra knowing about the apple juice. It is a Friday-level crossword. It is showing up to a hospital before the sun is fully up and signing your name in a log that no one will see except the person at the desk, who will nod and hand you a visitor badge and point you down the hall. My father never asked to be the center of anything. He spent his whole life making sure other people were comfortable before himself. He deserved, at minimum, to have the people who claimed to love him show up in the same room. Some of them finally did, late and with the particular guilt of people who understand what they missed. But they came, and he let them in without making them pay for it, which is probably the most Gerald thing he has ever done. I'm sharing this because I know there are people watching this who have sat in a hospital hallway and watched their phones stay quiet, who have sent the update and waited and gotten back a bathroom renovation photo or a fire emoji or nothing at all, who have kept their own version of a notes file, not because anyone would ever ask to see it, but because writing things down was the only way to make them feel real in a moment when everything felt like it was dissolving. If that's you, I see you. The log doesn't lie. You were there. That counts for something, whether or not anyone saw it at the time. Before you go, leave a hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. It means something. And if this story stayed with you, please subscribe. There are more of us out here than we think, sitting in the same hallways, and it helps to know we're not alone. Thank you for being here. There's something I've thought about often since the night I stood in that hospital hallway with 47 missed calls on my phone and a folded visitor log in my jacket pocket. I have thought about what it actually costs a person to show up. Not in the way we talk about it casually, not as a phrase, but as a physical, repeated act, signing your name at a desk, driving 2 hours before sunrise, sitting beside someone who is asleep and cannot know you are there, but being there anyway. That cost is real. It is paid in lost sleep and rearranged schedules and the particular loneliness of hospital waiting rooms at 6 in the morning. I paid it for 31 days, and what I learned is that the people who are unwilling to pay it will almost always find a way to appear as though they have. That is what Renata understood, I think, in some calculating part of herself. That in the modern world, appearance has become almost indistinguishable from presence. A caption, a reposted photo, a message in a thread she had created herself. She did not need to walk through those doors. She just needed enough people to believe she had. And for 19 days it worked. Because the people who should have been asking questions were comfortable enough not to. They saw the posts, felt reassured, and went back to their lives. That is not cruelty exactly. It is something quieter and more common, the willingness to accept a convenient version of events because investigating the real one requires effort. What I did, and I want to say this carefully because I am not proud of everything about how long it took, was keep the record. Not because I knew I would need it. I kept it because writing things down was the only way I knew to stay steady when everything felt like it was moving too fast. Every doctor's name, every dosage. Every morning I walked into that room and my father asked if anyone had called. The notes file was never meant to be evidence. It became evidence because the truth needed somewhere to live while the other version was spreading. I think that is what integrity actually looks like in practice. Not a grand gesture. Not a confrontation planned in advance. Just the accumulation of honest, unglamorous acts. Showing up, writing it down, telling the truth when asked, and eventually, when the moment requires it, holding the record up to the light and letting people see. Callum did not win anything the night of that video call. He simply made the real timeline visible. The cause and the effect were already there. He just stopped letting someone else narrate them. My father came home, he finished his crossword. He let the people who showed up late come in, without making them earn forgiveness out loud. Because that is who he has always been, a man who gives without keeping score, even when the score matters. I am not that generous yet, but I am trying to learn it from him. If you are in the middle of something like this right now, if you are the one keeping the record, sitting in the quiet, doing the unglamorous work while someone else takes the credit, keep going. The log does not lie, and the people who are not there will eventually have to stand in front of that fact, even if it takes longer than it should.